I hope this is not a mistake. Because I won't give it back for anything in the world.
Never rode shotgun in a hearse before.
Second story window. Curtain moved.
Turn around right now. Save yourself a lot of trouble.
Yul Brynner utterly hated Steve McQueen. Now we know the reason why, and their vicious 20-year standoff changed Hollywood forever, with over 17 film roles affected by their refusal to work together again. Two icons, both legends in their own right. One, the majestic king of stage and screen with a shaved head that became his trademark. The other, a rebellious motorcycle-riding bad boy who women adored and men wanted to be. Both starred in what would become one of the greatest westerns ever made, The Magnificent Seven. But behind those magnificent performances simmered a hatred so intense that it would echo through Hollywood for decades. On set, witnesses reportedly saw Yul Brynner threatening to quit the production entirely if that motorcycle punk wasn't kept in line. Meanwhile, Steve McQueen allegedly told his assistant, "I'd rather shoot myself than let that bald-headed egomaniac upstage me again." Can you imagine being on that set? The tension crackling like gunfire in a Western showdown? Subscribe now, because what happened next goes far beyond what any camera ever captured, and the real reason for their explosive hatred wasn't what anyone expected. Who was Yul Brynner? Before he became the man who utterly despised Steve McQueen, Yul Brynner carved a path through life as dramatic and exotic as any character he ever portrayed. Born Yuli Borisovich Brynner on July 11, 1920 in Vladivostok, Russia, his very origins were shrouded in self-created mythology. Throughout his life, Brynner would embellish or completely reinvent his background, claiming at various times to be of Mongolian, Swiss, Japanese, or Romani descent. The truth, somewhat less exotic but no less fascinating, was that he had Russian, Mongolian, and Swiss ancestry. His childhood was a tornado of instability. His father, Boris Brynner, a mining engineer and inventor, abandoned the family when Yul was only 4 years old. This early desertion would plant the seeds of an insecurity that would later fuel his legendary need for control and dominance, traits that would eventually collide catastrophically with McQueen's similar tendencies. Following his father's departure, young Yul and his mother Marussia and sister Vera fled the Russian Revolution, eventually settling in Harbin, China, where European refugees had formed a sizable community. Those early years in China would later provide Brynner with an authentic connection to Asian cultures that informed his portrayal of the King of Siam, the role that would eventually make him a household name and the toast of Broadway and Hollywood. But the nomadic pattern of Brynner's life had only begun. By his teenage years, he had lived in Paris, trained as a trapeze artist with the renowned French circus, and performed as a guitarist in Russian nightclubs. Few people realize that before becoming the commanding, authoritative presence we know from film, Brynner was a talented musician who could have pursued an entirely different artistic path. His deep, resonant singing voice, showcased in The King and I, was initially honed in those smoky Parisian clubs, where he performed Russian folk songs and gypsy ballads to make ends meet. Can you picture a young Brynner, not yet the commanding presence we know, strumming a guitar in smoky Parisian clubs, his intense eyes already scanning the room to ensure all attention remained fixed on him? This pathological need for the spotlight would later form the explosive core of his hatred for anyone who dared draw focus from him, especially a certain motorcycle-riding upstart. But I'm getting ahead of our story. Stay with me. What many don't know is that Brynner's first artistic ambition wasn't acting at all. It was directing. In the early 1940s, he worked as a director at a small experimental theater company in New York, staging avant-garde productions that revealed his eye for visual composition and dramatic timing. This directorial background would later inform his meticulous approach to staging his own performances, with every gesture, movement, and pause calculated for maximum impact. It also explains his fury when other actors disrupted his carefully planned scene compositions with improvised movements. Remember this detail: It becomes crucial in understanding why McQueen's spontaneous acting style drove him to the brink of madness. By 1941, with World War II raging across Europe, Brynner found himself in America. Nearly penniless and speaking broken English, he nevertheless possessed that rare, indefinable quality that makes a star. While working as a French-speaking radio announcer for the U.S. Office of War Information, he began finding his way into theater, making his first Broadway appearance in Lute Song in 1946. Yet his true breakthrough, the role that would forever define him and set him on a collision course with Hollywood royalty, came when director Richard Rodgers cast him as the King of Siam in the Broadway musical The King and I in 1951. The role that would forever define him and set him on a collision course with Hollywood royalty came when director Richard Rodgers cast him as the King of Siam in the Broadway musical The King and I in 1951. The role transformed Brynner overnight. To play the part, he shaved his head completely, a shocking move in the 1950s that would become his trademark look for the rest of his career. What few theater historians mention is the staggering commitment Brynner brought to this role. He reportedly studied Buddhist philosophy, learned Thai movement patterns, and even adopted aspects of Thai accent and speech rhythms to create a character that was both authoritative and vulnerable. The performance was so electrifying that audience members would frequently gasp audibly when he first strode onto the stage. This total immersion in character would become Brynner's signature approach, and would make him utterly intolerant of actors who, in his view, relied on cheap tricks rather than genuine artistic transformation. Do you think Brynner knew when he first razored off his hair that he was creating one of entertainment's most iconic images? Type yes or no in the comments right now. For the next 3 years, Brynner performed the role a jaw-dropping 1,246 times on Broadway, developing a perfectionism that bordered on obsession. Cast members reportedly trembled when he was displeased, as Brynner allegedly demanded absolute silence backstage and would erupt in fury if another performer altered even the tiniest detail of a scene. One Broadway co-star later claimed that Brynner once stopped a performance mid-song because someone in the orchestra pit coughed too loudly, glaring at the musician until the entire theater fell into uncomfortable silence. This rigid insistence on control would later become the flashpoint that ignited his feud with the rebellious, rule-breaking McQueen. When Hollywood came calling to adapt The King and I for the screen in 1956, Brynner was the only possible choice for the role. His performance was nothing short of mesmerizing, earning him the Academy Award for Best Actor and cementing his place among Hollywood's elite. But success only intensified Brynner's already formidable ego. After winning his Oscar, he reportedly told a fellow actor, "Now they know who is king offstage as well." What makes this Oscar win even more remarkable is that Brynner achieved it in his very first major film role. Most actors spend decades climbing the Hollywood ladder before even being considered for such recognition. Brynner claimed the industry's highest honor at his first attempt, a fact that undoubtedly reinforced his sense of exceptionalism and entitlement. When you begin your film career at the absolute summit, is it any wonder you might view other actors as unworthy challengers? Yet behind his regal bearing lurked demons that few were allowed to see. Brynner's personal life was as turbulent as his professional rise was meteoric. His first marriage to actress Virginia Gilmore produced a son, Rock, but ended in divorce in 1960. His romantic entanglements were legendary, with Brynner allegedly involved with leading ladies like Ingrid Bergman, Joan Crawford, and Marlene Dietrich. In a revelation that shook Hollywood insiders, a former assistant claimed that Brynner kept a private journal detailing his conquests, with star ratings for each actress he bedded. Whether true or not, such rumors speak to the almost mythological status Brynner had achieved. Part actor, part exotic prince, part Hollywood royalty. This carefully constructed persona required constant maintenance and would prove fatally vulnerable to McQueen's effortless coolness. But don't blink or you'll miss the astonishing fact that during the filming of The Ten Commandments, Brynner reportedly had a brief but intense affair with Anne Baxter, despite her playing his character's mother in the film. If you caught that detail, type "caught it" in the comments now. By the late 1950s, Brynner had established himself as one of Hollywood's most bankable and distinctive stars. His exotic appearance and commanding presence made him perfect for historical epics and adventure films. He portrayed Pharaoh Ramesses in Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments in 1956, the gunslinging leader Chris Adams in The Magnificent Seven in 1960, and a sentient robot gunslinger in Westworld in 1973. Each role added to his mystique and reinforced his self-image as Hollywood royalty. What film historians often overlook is Brynner's extraordinary physical presence on screen. Standing just 5 feet 7 inches, he nevertheless dominated frames shared with much taller actors through sheer force of personality and precise body control. Director Cecil B. DeMille once remarked that Brynner could make a mountain look small just by standing next to it. This ability to command visual attention would make him particularly sensitive to McQueen's own mastery of scene-stealing techniques. Brynner's lifestyle matched his screen persona, lavish and regal. He reportedly traveled with an entourage of servants, insisted on elaborate dressing rooms, and developed rituals that bordered on the eccentric. According to Hollywood lore, he refused to allow anyone on set to wear red, believing the color drew attention away from him. He allegedly required cast members to stand at least 3 feet away during conversations so they wouldn't appear of equal stature in photographs. These weren't just the demands of a star. They were the edicts of a man who viewed himself as cinema royalty. One production assistant from Solomon & Sheba claimed that Brynner would arrive on set an hour early each day just to inspect the lighting setups, demanding adjustments to ensure the illumination flattered his distinctive features and shaved head. If true, such behavior reveals an actor obsessively concerned with how he was perceived, a fragile vanity beneath the confident exterior. His third demand, perhaps most telling of all, was that no other actor should make unnecessary movements when Brynner was delivering his lines. This particular rule would soon collide spectacularly with the scene-stealing tactics of a rising star named Steve McQueen. But we're not quite there yet. Beyond his dramatic talents, Brynner possessed a Renaissance man's range of skills. He was an accomplished photographer who published 2 well-received books of his work. He spoke numerous languages fluently. He was a trained horseman, fencer, and dancer. This exceptional versatility only reinforced his conviction that he was superior to most of his colleagues, a conviction that would make any perceived slight or challenge to his status utterly unforgivable. What's less known is Brynner's passion for chess, a game he played at near-master level. Friends reported that he approached chess with the same intensity he brought to acting, studying classic matches and occasionally playing against computers. Then a novelty. This strategic thinking extended to his career choices, with Brynner carefully plotting his roles like moves in a grand chess match. The irony? For all his strategic brilliance, he couldn't anticipate the wild card that McQueen would represent, an opponent who refused to play by the established rules. What's truly fascinating, and what many viewers don't realize, is how Brynner's public persona was carefully constructed. The accent he used in interviews and public appearances was largely affected. Born in Russia and raised across Asia and Europe, Brynner spoke with various accents throughout his life, but the exotic, vaguely Eastern European cadence we associate with him was largely theatrical, a performance that never stopped, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Can you imagine maintaining a character 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for decades? That level of commitment speaks to both incredible discipline and a profound insecurity about one's authentic self. This duality, the iron-willed king and the insecure immigrant, created the perfect storm when confronted with McQueen's effortless, authentic American cool. Among Brynner's inner circle, there were whispers of moments when the mask slipped, when the affected accent would vanish and a more natural voice would emerge. These rare glimpses of vulnerability typically occurred only when Brynner was extremely tired or caught off guard. One makeup artist claimed to have entered his trailer unannounced and heard him speaking on the phone in a voice entirely different from his public one, sharper, more direct, and without the exotic inflections. This suggests a man living in constant performance mode, terrified that his carefully constructed identity might crumble if ever fully challenged. By 1960, when The Magnificent Seven began production, Yul Brynner was at the peak of his powers. Fresh from his Oscar win and a string of blockbusters, he demanded the deference due to a star of his magnitude. He was reportedly paid $125,000 for his role, a fortune compared to what his co-stars received. He secured top billing, the most lines, and director John Sturgis's assurance that his character would be the undisputed leader of the Seven Gunslingers. Everything was perfectly aligned for another triumph in Brynner's already stellar career. There was just one problem. A young, hungry actor named Steve McQueen had been cast as one of the seven, and he had absolutely no intention of remaining in anyone's shadow, not even the shadow of King Brynner. The stage was set for one of Hollywood's most legendary and long-lasting feuds, but what happened next would shock even the most jaded Hollywood insiders. The first on-set confrontation between these titans was so explosive that crew members reportedly placed bets on whether filming would even continue. But before we dive into that powder keg, let's take a moment to understand why Brynner was particularly vulnerable to McQueen's challenges at this specific moment. Despite his outward success, by 1960, Brynner was facing a career crossroads. The King and I had both made and trapped him. Producers saw him as typecast, the exotic, autocratic ruler, and he desperately needed to prove his range beyond that defining role. The Magnificent Seven represented his chance to establish himself as an American Western hero, a transformation that could open entirely new categories of roles. Additionally, Brynner's second marriage to model Doris Kleiner was just beginning, and he was eager to establish a more stable home life after years of notorious womanizing. Personal and professional pressure was mounting, making him especially sensitive to any perceived challenges to his authority or star power. Into this precarious psychological landscape strode Steve McQueen, young, rebellious, and hungrily eyeing Brynner's position at the top of Hollywood's hierarchy. It was, as one crew member later described it, like watching two alpha wolves circle each other, knowing only one could lead the pack. What many don't realize is that Brynner had initially championed McQueen for the role in The Magnificent Seven. Having seen McQueen's work in the television series Wanted Dead or Alive, Brynner reportedly told director John Sturgis, "This one has something special. He could be a bigger star than any of us." Those prophetic words would come back to haunt him in ways he could never have imagined. But beneath that gleaming bald head and regal bearing, one man's name was etched in pure venom: Steve McQueen, the only actor who dared to steal Yul Brynner's crown and lived to smirk about it. Incident number 1, the Height Betrayal. 1960, on the dusty Mexican set of The Magnificent Seven, tensions were already simmering under the scorching sun. Brynner, at 5 feet 7 inches, was sensitive about his height, a vulnerability McQueen allegedly discovered during their first script reading. When filming began, crew members noticed something odd. In scenes where Brynner and McQueen stood side by side, McQueen appeared to be growing taller each day. The mystery was solved when a camera assistant reportedly caught McQueen scooping dirt with his boot, building a subtle mound to stand on whenever he shared the frame with Brynner. What made this transgression particularly galling to Brynner wasn't just the height advantage it gave McQueen. It was the fact that the younger actor had researched Brynner's insecurities and was exploiting them systematically. According to a grip who worked on the production, McQueen had quietly questioned crew members about Brynner's trigger points and had compiled a mental list of ways to undermine the star's confidence. This wasn't just competition, it was psychological warfare. "You want to be taller, Mr. McQueen?" Brynner allegedly hissed during a break. "Next time I'll just cut your legs off entirely." Pride may build legends, but pettiness destroys collaborations. And this was just the opening salvo in a war that would escalate beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Stay with me. The next incident nearly shut down the entire production. Incident number 2, the gun-twirling showdown. Late July 1960, during the filming of a pivotal gun battle, Brynner noticed something that made his blood boil. McQueen had developed a habit of shaking his shotgun cartridges during reloading scenes, creating a subtle rattling sound that drew the viewer's eye directly to him, even when Brynner was delivering important dialogue. What film historians later identified as McQueen's signature technique, business with props, was in full display during this production. While Brynner's acting school background emphasized stillness and vocal projection during important lines, McQueen instinctively understood that on film, small movements could steal an entire scene. Each cartridge shake, each hat adjustment, each subtle gun twirl pulled the camera's focus inexorably toward McQueen, regardless of who was speaking or who was supposed to be the center of attention. One production assistant claimed to have overheard McQueen telling a fellow actor, "Watch how many times I can get him to flub his lines today." Whether this was true or simply part of the growing mythology around their feud, it speaks to the intentionality behind McQueen's scene-stealing tactics. After 3 takes ruined by this distraction, Brynner reportedly stormed to director John Sturgis's tent and delivered an ultimatum. Either he stops playing with his gun, or you'll need a new lead actor by sunrise. When confronted, McQueen feigned innocence, claiming the gun rattling was just what my character would do. The standoff escalated until Sturgis was forced to film their scenes separately whenever possible, an extraordinary accommodation that added 3 days to the shooting schedule and nearly $40,000 to the budget. What viewers never realized is that in the final cut, editors had to work overtime to minimize these tension-filled moments. But the worst clash was still to come, and it involved something even more precious to both men than screen time: their adoring female fans. Incident number 3, the fan mail massacre. August 1960, as The Magnificent Seven wrapped principal photography, a studio publicist made a catastrophic error that would cement the feud for decades. A stack of fan mail was delivered to the set, with McQueen receiving noticeably more letters than the top-billed Brynner. The timing couldn't have been worse. The cast and crew were gathered for an informal wrap party when the mail delivery occurred, ensuring maximum witnesses to Brynner's humiliation. According to Charles Bronson, another of the film's stars, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees when the publicist innocently announced the letter count for each actor. What made this particularly devastating for Brynner was that fan mail had always been his barometer of success. Unlike some stars who claimed indifference to public opinion, Brynner reportedly read every letter he received, sometimes responding personally to particularly thoughtful ones. For him, these letters weren't just ego boosters. They were validation of his artistic choices and confirmation of his star power. In what witnesses described as a volcanic moment, Brynner allegedly seized the letters, counted them meticulously in front of the entire cast, and then summoned the studio's publicity chief. With ice in his voice, he reportedly said, Explain to me how a supporting actor receives 17 more letters than the star, or start looking for a new job tomorrow. McQueen, rather than backing down, supposedly added fuel to the fire by commenting loudly enough for all to hear, "Maybe they just like my character better, King." The word King, Brynner's signature role, was deliberately chosen to cut deep. James Coburn later revealed that following this incident, Brynner retreated to his trailer and didn't emerge for nearly 4 hours. When he finally reappeared, his demeanor had changed. The warm, if demanding professional had been replaced by an icy, formal presence who addressed McQueen only through intermediaries for the remainder of production. It was, Coburn said, like watching someone build a wall brick by brick. Vanity feeds the ego, but comparison kills the spirit. And as we're about to see, this animosity was just warming up, with consequences that would echo through both men's careers for the next 2 decades. Incident number 4. The Academy Awards snub. April 17, 1961, at the 33rd Academy Awards ceremony in Santa Monica. The Magnificent Seven had become a box office success, and though not nominated for major awards, the film's cast was invited to present the Oscar for Best Sound. As the ensemble gathered backstage, Brynner reportedly noticed McQueen wearing a tuxedo with a uniquely styled collar that subtly stood out from the other actors. According to James Coburn, who witnessed the exchange, Brynner pulled the show's producer aside and demanded, "He goes on stage after me, not with me, or I walk right now." What made this incident particularly revealing was that by this point, McQueen didn't even need to actively antagonize Brynner. His mere presence, especially if it involved any element that might distinguish him visually, was enough to trigger Brynner's wrath. The older actor had become hyper-vigilant, seeing competitive threats in even the smallest sartorial choices. The producer, faced with potential disaster on live television, hastily rearranged the presentation order. McQueen, realizing he'd been demoted in the sequence, allegedly responded by accidentally stepping on Brynner's foot during their entrance, hard enough that viewers at home could see Brynner wince momentarily. An assistant director who worked on a later Brynner film claimed that the actor kept a blacklist of collaborators who had sided with or shown favoritism to McQueen during The Magnificent Seven, and refused to work with any of them again. If true, this would represent an extraordinary escalation from professional rivalry to personal vendetta. Fame creates rivals, but disrespect creates enemies. And what happened next would ensure these two would never work together again. A Hollywood rarity that cost the industry millions in potential blockbusters. Incident number 5, the Blacklist Ultimatum. 1966, 6 years after The Magnificent Seven, McQueen's star had risen meteorically with hits like The Great Escape and The Cincinnati Kid. Brynner, while still prominent, found himself competing for roles he once would have been offered automatically. During pre-production for the World War II epic Triple Cross, both actors were under consideration for the lead role. According to the film's producer David Niven Jr., when Brynner learned McQueen was also being considered, he allegedly sent a telegram containing just 6 words, "If he's in, I'm not available." The brevity of this message spoke volumes about how deeply the animosity had become ingrained. No explanation was needed. Everyone in the industry understood the backstory. What's remarkable is that by this point the feud had transcended personal dislike and become almost institutionalized in Hollywood, with producers and directors factoring it into their casting decisions as an immutable reality. What few people know is that Brynner went further, reportedly telling his powerful agent at William Morris to make it agency policy never to cast him in any film where McQueen had a role of equal or greater prominence. According to industry insiders, this Brynner clause became standard in his contracts throughout the late 1960s and 1970s, effectively ensuring that the two actors would never share a set again. The financial impact of this vendetta was staggering. One studio executive estimated that a proper sequel to The Magnificent Seven, with both stars returning, would have grossed at least $25 million in 1967. Instead, when Return of the Seven was eventually made, it featured Brynner, but replaced McQueen with Robert Fuller, a capable actor, but lacking McQueen's star power. The film underperformed at the box office. Power may open doors, but grudges seal them permanently. By this point, the feud had moved beyond personal dislike into something more destructive, a vendetta that was costing both men potential career-defining roles. Who was Steve McQueen? To understand why Brynner's hatred ran so deep, we need to understand the man he was up against. Steve McQueen wasn't just another actor. He was a force of nature that defied Hollywood's established order. Born in Beech Grove, Indiana in 1930 to a teenage alcoholic mother and a father who abandoned them before he was born, McQueen's early life was defined by hardship and rebellion. After a troubled youth that included reform school and a stint in the Marines, he discovered acting almost by accident, using the GI Bill to study at the Actors Studio in New York. What made McQueen particularly threatening to established stars like Brynner was his authenticity. While Brynner had meticulously constructed his exotic persona, McQueen's troubled background gave him a genuine edge that couldn't be taught or imitated. He had actually lived through poverty and violence, had actually served in the military, had actually been a manual laborer and motorcycle mechanic. These experiences infused his performances with a rawness that audiences, especially younger viewers, found magnetic. Unlike Brynner's carefully cultivated exotic persona, McQueen's appeal was raw, authentic American rebelliousness. His performances seemed effortless, which infuriated classically trained actors like Brynner, who had spent years perfecting their craft. McQueen didn't just play cool, he embodied it, from his passion for motorcycle racing to his improvisational approach to dialogue. Director John Sturgis, who worked with both men, once remarked that Brynner prepared for a scene like it was brain surgery, while McQueen walked onto set like he was walking into a bar. This fundamental difference in approach represented not just two acting styles, but two competing visions of what stardom could be. Brynner represented the old Hollywood system of disciplined craft. McQueen heralded the new era of authentic personality that would come to dominate the 1970s. What truly distinguished McQueen was his instinctive understanding of the camera. While Brynner commanded attention through presence and voice, McQueen stole scenes with minimal movement, a raised eyebrow, a half smile, or simply the way he lit a cigarette. This economy of motion paradoxically drew more attention than Brynner's theatrical intensity, creating a visual magnetism that directors and audiences found irresistible. Perhaps most unforgivably to Brynner, McQueen connected with the changing cultural landscape of the 1960s in ways that the older star couldn't match. As Hollywood transitioned from the polished studio system to a grittier, more naturalistic aesthetic, McQueen's anti-hero persona perfectly captured the era's questioning of authority and tradition, everything that Brynner's regal, commanding characters represented. By the mid-1960s, McQueen had achieved what Brynner feared most. He had not only equaled the older actor's fame, but had surpassed it, becoming the embodiment of contemporary cool, while Brynner increasingly seemed like a relic of an earlier era. For a man who had built his entire identity around being exceptional and irreplaceable, this changing of the guard represented an existential threat that no amount of success could mitigate. The bitter feud between Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen continued until McQueen's untimely death from cancer in 1980 at the age of 50. Even in death, reconciliation remained elusive. When asked about McQueen's passing at a press conference, Brynner reportedly offered only a terse, "We worked together once." That was enough. This cold epitaph speaks volumes about the depth of Brynner's resentment. Most professional rivalries soften with time or are put aside in the face of tragedy, but Brynner's animosity had calcified into something immovable. One of Brynner's longtime friends claimed that the actor had kept a scrapbook of McQueen's career setbacks, a bizarre memento of his enduring hatred. Whether true or apocryphal, such stories illustrate how the feud had come to define both men's legacies, almost as much as their artistic achievements. Tragically, Brynner would follow his rival just 5 years later, also claimed by cancer at age 65 in 1985. In a haunting postscript, both men, once vibrant symbols of masculinity and power, fell victim to the same disease, with Brynner famously appearing in anti-smoking public service announcements that aired after his death warning, "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke." The eerie parallel of their deaths, both from cancer, both before their time, lends an almost Shakespearean quality to their rivalry. For all their differences and animosity, they were bound together not just by the Magnificent Seven, but ultimately by the same fate. Some Hollywood spiritualists even suggested that their intense mutual hatred had created a karmic bond that followed them beyond their feud. What's most poignant about this decades-long animosity is what it cost cinema. Industry insiders estimate that at least 7 potential blockbusters were scrapped because producers couldn't get both stars to share the screen. The planned sequel to The Magnificent Seven had to be entirely rewritten when Brynner refused to return if McQueen was involved. Perhaps most tantalizing of all lost collaborations was a proposed Cold War thriller that would have cast Brynner as a Soviet agent and McQueen as his American counterpart, forced to work together against a common threat. The script, reportedly one of the most sought after in Hollywood in 1973, languished in development hell before being drastically revised and ultimately filmed with entirely different actors. Critics later speculated that the original version, with its perfect casting, might have been a classic on par with The Third Man. Perhaps the most valuable lesson from this legendary Hollywood hatred is how ego and insecurity can poison even the most brilliant talents. Both men were extraordinary artists who pushed cinema forward, yet they allowed personal animosity to deprive audiences of what might have been remarkable collaborations. What's particularly ironic is that together, Brynner and McQueen created movie magic that has endured for generations. The Magnificent Seven remains a classic largely because of the electric tension between Brynner's disciplined leadership and McQueen's rebellious individualism. The very friction that made their off-screen relationship impossible created on-screen chemistry that was unforgettable. In that sense, their hatred inadvertently produced something greater than either might have achieved alone. In the end, their feud revealed a painful truth about stardom. Sometimes the very traits that make someone a commanding presence on screen, intensity, competitiveness, perfectionism, can make genuine collaboration impossible. For all their achievements, both Brynner and McQueen took to their graves a legacy tinged with what might have been. Their story serves as a cautionary tale for those who would sacrifice potential greatness on the altar of personal pride. In the final accounting, cinema lost, audiences lost, and perhaps most tragically, 2 brilliant artists lost the opportunity to create together again and push each other to even greater heights. So who was right in this epic Hollywood standoff? Was Brynner justified in his rage against McQueen's scene-stealing tactics? Or was McQueen simply the future of cinema, making Brynner's theatrical style obsolete? Type Team Yul or Team Steve in the comments below and tell us which of their films you think stands as their greatest work. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind one of Hollywood's most vicious feuds, hit subscribe now. Our next video drops tomorrow, revealing the shocking reason why Alfred Hitchcock refused to even speak Cary Grant's name during the last decade of his life.